Hi guys, today we're going to work on some photosynthesis, and I actually got to fix this because it's spelled wrong. So there we go. Photosynthesis is what we're going to work on today. So let's start with it. This should look familiar, this chloroplast, and the chloroplast structure you've already done for your homework. So see if you can actually label all of these structures, and you should be able to do that by looking at page 231. One of the things that you might not remember with these two things is that there's an inner membrane and then there's this outer membrane. So these two things might not be familiar because that was back in October that we did that. So we've got an inner membrane and the outer membrane, but you should be able to fill in these particular items. This is a stack, and these are individual ones, and this particular box is pointing to the semi-solid liquid that surrounds all of this. So take a moment and see if you can label these, put that in your notes, and then when you're done, come on back. So how'd you do? This is the stroma, so hopefully you got that. Individual items here are thylakoids, and a stack of thylakoids are considered a granum. So hope you did well on that. So one of the things that's really important to understand in photosynthesis is the equation. So the substrates are what we actually start with in a reaction, and those go here. So this is what we add together, or we put into the equation, I should say. And this is in the presence of light. And then the products are what we end with in a reaction. So again, the substrates are what we start with, and the products are what we end with. So go to page 232 and fill in these in your notes so that you have the equation. And not only will you have to know the particular molecule, like say carbon dioxide, but you're actually going to need to know the number. So what you put here, make sure you put the number in there as well. Okay, and when you're done, again, come on back. So here's the next slide, and again we've put in the numbers here. So here you should have carbon dioxide, and that should be 6 carbon dioxide is one of the substrates. The other substrate that we actually put into the equation is 6 H2O. What comes out is glucose, and that would be C6H12O6 plus 6O2. So it's important to kind of think about, well, where would these items come from, and how do they actually get there? So if we look at this carbon dioxide, I'll give you a hint. The carbon dioxide comes from the air, right? It comes from the exhalations, like if we breathe out carbon dioxide, that's what the plant is actually going to take in. So that's where the carbon dioxide is coming from. How it actually gets there, you can find on page 681 and 682. So we know that photosynthesis occurs in the leaf and in the stem, but specifically where and how does it get there? So it just doesn't, magically appear. It has to actually travel into the leaf. So how does it actually get there? So what I'd like you to do is look on page 681, 682 and see if you can find out how carbon dioxide gets into the leaf. And we know that the carbon dioxide that the leaf uses for photosynthesis comes from the atmosphere, and specifically exhalations of animals that do breathe out that carbon dioxide. So for the other three, I'd like you to do the same thing. So where does this water come from, and how does it get to the leaf? Because we might know that the water actually doesn't get into the leaf through the rain. A lot of people think that by accident, so that's a misconception. So it doesn't actually get in through the rain and then it just gets into the leaf and the plant uses it for photosynthesis. It gets in somehow different. And then once we make that glucose, where does it go once it's made? We don't keep it in the leaf, so where does it go? And how does it get from the leaf to that particular spot? You're going to find that answer on page 643. And then the last thing is that oxygen that is produced, where does that go and how does it actually get there? How does it actually travel from the leaf and get into the atmosphere? So take a moment and see if you can fill those out. And when you're done, come on back. Alright, so hopefully you put in here that it's carbon dioxide, right? We said that it comes from the atmosphere and it actually gets into the leaf through the stomata. Stomata are little pores in the leaf that actually regulate the opening and closing, and actually prevents a lot of water loss too, because evaporation, plants can do this process. It's called transpiration, where water is evaporating out through the leaf, the pores in the leaf. So the leaf closes and opens these little stomata to regulate how much water is lost. If it closes, it actually can't get in CO2, but if the stomata is open, the leaf can actually allow this carbon dioxide to come in. But the side effect of that is that it actually can lose water by evaporation at the same time. So water comes in through the roots. So where do these items come from? Well, the water comes from the ground and it comes in through the roots, and it actually goes up the plant through the xylem into the leaf. Now we make glucose here, C6H12O6, and we said we don't store it in the leaf. It actually gets stored in the roots. So it has to travel down, and it travels down through the vascular tissue via the phloem, and it actually goes down from the leaf through the phloem into the roots and is stored there. The oxygen, if the stomata is open, is allowed to leave the leaf where it's produced, move out through the stomata, and go into the atmosphere. So this picture is kind of a nice picture. You'll find this in your textbook as well, that this summarizes overall the light reactions in the Calvin cycle. So the light reactions occur in the thylakoid, so they're showing us here that it's in the thylakoid. We need water, so water is put in, and when we use water, we actually liberate oxygen in the process. So we need water, we use it, and it actually turns into oxygen. And in that process, we make ATP and NADPH that we're going to use in the Calvin cycle. Okay, so we're going to use those in this Calvin cycle. Once we use the ATP and NADPH in the Calvin cycle, we know that when ATP gives up its energy, it turns into ADP. When NADPH gives off its electrons, it turns into NAD+. And that will go back, shuttle back into the light reaction, into the thylakoids, where we can actually make ATP and NADPH again. The Calvin cycle doesn't need light, but it does need CO2. So CO2 comes into the Calvin cycle, it goes around, and we actually can turn that into a carbon molecule. The intermediate is called G3P, and that G3P is actually used to generate and to make glucose, which is our C6H12O6. So this is a picture that you should feel familiar with, and again, knowing that the light reactions happen in the thylakoid and the Calvin cycle happens in the stroma. So this is just another summary of this process. We said that it occurs in the thylakoid, we need water, that's a substrate, we also need light, we produce a product that is oxygen, we make ATP and NADPH. The Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma, we need CO2 as our substrate, we also need ATP and NADPH that we actually have made in the light reaction. Excuse me. And in the process we make glucose, which is C6H12O6. So that's just a nice little summary for your photosynthesis. This is a good, for the visual learners in the group, this would be a good summary sheet. And if those of you that like actually more process oriented, this might be something to consider studying, and this slide as well as this slide. So I hope that's been helpful, and I will look forward to seeing you guys. I hope you'll be ready for the quiz. Study hard.